Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's Fire Engineering ISFSI Humpday Hangout. Excited for this month's topic. We're going to be talking about commercial building fires and how we can train for those commercial building fires. We've all I'm sure every town in America has got some type of commercial occupancy. And so it's, the reality is that at some point in time, these buildings do catch on fire, and how do we react? And we fall back to our training. So that's kind of the topic for today. I'd like to start by saying thanks to Fire Engineering Clarion Company for having the International Society of Fire Service Instructors out again for this month's hangout. For those that are not aware, October 7th will be the start of early registration for FDIC. So mark your calendars now quickly for that. It's quickly approaching. They just had the FDIC board meeting where they determined what classes and those sort of things. Over 1,000 submissions for classes to instruct next year at FDIC, which is incredible. Very talented instructors from across the country submitted applications, across the world for that matter, I should say, submitted applications to instruct. So as we all know on this call, that FDIC is the top-notch training conference and top-notch conference for vendors and everything else in the fire service. So definitely looking forward to that again next April in Indianapolis. So without any further ado, we will start the discussion. We have our good friend, Damon Simmons and Jesse Marcotte, familiar faces to the Humpday Hangout scene. So I guess, guys, some of the things we think about is, one of the topics when I think of commercial building fires, we've had a couple here recently in my town, and they always present the challenge in the fact that, I guess, the mindset of the crews, right? So, sometimes the mindset is like, hey, listen, this is just a big house sort of thing, which obviously we all know it's not. So, just kind of some of the things, construction differences and those sort of things that we see. Just talk about some of that stuff. We'll talk about our truck setup. I always think it's interesting when we talk about our apparatus, and someone was saying it, and I apologize for not knowing the individual, but I was having a conversation that today's engines and equipment is set up for a residential structure, and it's not set up for a commercial building. And so, how do we change that and that sort of stuff? But I'm just curious. I mean, Damon, big city Oakland, Jesse and I are in small town America. You guys have had commercial building fires. What are your thoughts? We got one more guest that just joined in. Unfortunately, we got some East Coast representation here.
Exactly.
Anthony,
saved the day.
Yeah. We're talking commercial building fires. North Hudson Regional, that's mostly grassland. You guys didn't really have a lot of commercial building, did you?
For the most part, yeah. The grass, though, although it wasn't the same kind of grass you got out there.
Awesome. Well, we're just gonna go around the horn a little bit, talk. I mean, just some of your experiences with commercial building fires, thoughts, and then we'll just kind of get this conversation started.
Yeah. And Brian, you hit on a good point to open up. You talked about that mindset. And before I carry on, as always, whenever I'm having conversations about firefighting, we all know that at the end of the day, it's about getting quick water in sufficient quantity, correct application, along with doing a good early advanced search is the mission. But in order for that to happen, what we're talking about here today is how do we set up that ongoing and continued training and education to ensure success. So back to your point, oftentimes, because most of our fires are in residential structures, we tend to bring that, as you mentioned at the onset, that residential mindset into commercial buildings. Now, as we know, there are some similarities between the two. However, there are some significant differences. And what I tell folks when we're talking about that commercial mindset, whether it's from the engine company, the engine officer perspective, or the truck officer perspective, or the IC perspective, is that first, from something simple as hose line selection. Most of our residential building fires, 1 to 3 lines is all we need to put the fire out. However, when you have a commercial structure, oftentimes using large diameter hose lines. Matter of fact, we had a fire about 2 weeks ago in West Oakland, where started on the outside, eventually made its way on the inside in a type 3 construction. But it's that mindset of not pulling 1 3/4 hose lines versus a 2 1/4, 2 1/2. When I say 2 1/4, I was having this conversation with some folks over in San Francisco, and they were like, "What the heck are you talking about? 2 1/4?" So there is 2 1/4 inch hose lines out there. So, But yes, so that's a small part of it. Well, actually, say a small part, but a big part of it is transitioning that mindset. Bigger building, greater complexities, and when we're talking about commercial buildings, commercial high-rise buildings, evacuation. Do I shelter in place? Do I move folks from a higher floor down to a lower floor, or do I move them totally outside? And if I move them outside, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, dead of winter. What is my plan as an incident commander for that? So those are some of the things you have to think about. What are those subtle and overt differences in the mindset when we arrive on scene at 2 o'clock in the morning at a commercial building versus 2 o'clock in the morning at 1,100 square foot, 1 story or 2 story single family dwelling?
I like it, and we'll hit on all that stuff today. And as we discuss these, I think we're seeing more and more commercial building fires across the country, and a lot of them are ending in unfortunately, right, some of them are ending in major conflagrations, and right, wrong, or different. I don't want to Monday morning quarterback anybody that was on those scenes or whatever, but I think it's important to your point, of thinking these things through. I always, I tell our guys too is, residential structures, we can't get into those, but yet we typically find very good success, right, on those single family homes. Commercial buildings, public buildings, I can walk in anytime I want and should have a good pre-plan of it. And so we should be knocking those out of the park, walking in and be like, hey, I know exactly where this is at and that's that. And, as we talk more and we talk about suppression systems and alarm systems, those sort of things, have we, and I'm guilty, I'm not, throwing stones from a glass house, but, have we walked those commercial buildings on our first due and been like, man, where's that fire alarm panel at again? Or where's that FDC, or, things that we should know where they're at in our first due locations. But Jesse, what about you? What's going on in North Township?
I think it's a great topic. And I think when we think about it, one of the best ways to break it down are what are those strategic considerations. So as Damon said, when we pull up at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, what are we thinking about? What are our cues? What are we using as the basis for our framework? And then what are those tactical considerations? So now that we've identified the building, what's going on, size, extent, location of the fire protection systems, building construction type, all those things, fire protection features. Now, what are we going to do about it? And I think that's the big segue is knowing and identifying where we're operating, and then knowing how to do and when to do what we're trying to do. So whether that's that suppression piece, surge piece, ventilation piece, water supply piece, there's so many different variables, and we obviously want to make sure that we're making those decisions as effectively as possible.
No, I think that's key too. And this whole topic kind of comes off of Anthony just submitted an article for fire engineering on commercial fires, and we just did one as well. I just submitted yesterday. But to your point, the staffing. A residential structure fire. Some of us run the same first alarm, whether it's a big box store or it's 1,100 square foot residential structure. Some people run different, right? And kudos to those. And NFPA would tell us we need more firefighters on a commercial building. How many of us automatic send that? Smoking a building at Lowe's, is it the same response as smoking a building at Mrs. Johnson's house? Right. And so, we know it's going to take more people on that hand line and that sort of stuff. So, Anthony, have you ever, I don't know, I hate to put you on the spot. Have you been on a commercial building fire? I mean, really about those?
Yeah, a few.
Yeah.
We listen, we have everything actually, it's really interesting. The only thing we don't have by us anymore are single family residential structures. They're all now been converted to multiple dwellings, but we have old factories, old warehouses, new warehouses, the lightweight constructed warehouses. We have a ton of those. We've had some good fires in them, ones that went really well, ones that didn't go so well, and sometimes not through the fault of us. Some of them are vacant, and that's not only us. Hoboken has them, Jersey City has them. So there was one actually in I think it was Kearney. It might have been Harrison, but North Hudson went out there, and one of the firefighters was up on the ladder pipe, and we never put people on a ladder pipe. I don't know what he was doing there, but it was a factory that, and I know I'm getting on a little tangent here. The factory was like a chemical factory. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was hydrochloric acid, hydrogen chloride in the smoke, and they tested the smoke down at the ground level, and it was fine. But this guy was on a ladder pipe, and he inhaled hydrochloric acid, and he lost 30% of his lung capacity. He had to leave the job. So, not only are these buildings large, and we'll talk about all those things, but they have a very heavy and toxic fire load in most of them. And this goes back even to, residential structures, garages and all that stuff now, but, you want to exponentially, multiply it. You're dealing with, some of these buildings where, we don't even know what's in the smoke, Then you add in the construction limitations, whether it's bowstring truss or lightweight truss or really old ordinary construction. We add in the disorientation activity, disorientation profile of the building due to, difficult to negotiate big area structures, extreme air management requirements, high risk, low frequency, and staffing and supervisory. All these things lead to a fire that in a building that changes the rules of the game, changes the rules. We cannot operate the same way as we do in any other type of building, and it's not only buildings that change those rules. Look at what happened in Newark about a year ago. That was basically a commercial structure, a high rise, and a confined space all in one with an extreme toxic fire load. So these cargo ships now aren't that much different than your warehouses and your factories. So big issue that we don't deal with enough, and we don't do so well in it because of
that. No, I totally agree, and I think what you see in the infiltration, if you will, for lack of better terms, of these commercial buildings, right? And last week, we're talking, and I had the opportunity to talk to Jack Murphy about the big, tall buildings and what they're doing with tall buildings and things like that and commercials. And we'd always think tall buildings, big buildings, commercial buildings, urban settings, the Oakland, the North Hudson, right? But those buildings are showing up literally in rural America. As I drive across the state of Missouri, once I get outside of St. Louis and Kansas City, I'm in a lot of farm town, right? It's very rural. Sometimes it's volunteer, and you're seeing what are they putting in a large Amazon distribution center, tilt up construction, and so, I think about those sort of things as we go, and how these fires are, sometimes they're going to become a regional response, and to your point of mindset and thought processing, we just had recently in Missouri an ice warehouse fire. Middle Missouri, it was hot and, water supply issues and this, that, and the other. And it ended up having to go to regional responses because there's just a lack of volunteers and a lack of units to respond. So to your point of staffing issues, I want to talk about construction real quick because I think, we all can, have construction in our mind. You talk about bowstring construction and some of the, old masonry type 3 construction and those sort of things. So from an instructional standpoint, I'll get your guys' perspective on this, but I'll lay mine out there and just see if you guys agree, and you guys can add on to it or tell me I'm crazy. I feel like in the fire service, when we talk about these construction types, and we, type 1, type 2, and all these sort of things, we do a really good job of defining what it is. And so these firefighters that are coming on the job, these company officers are getting promoted, and even sometimes the chief officers that are arriving on scene could easily define what the building is, right? It's a type 1, it's fire, blah, 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 blah. So here's, okay, but could they tell you, like, if this building's on fire, what are my hazards? Is it the, trapped, the void spaces? Is it the structural collapse training? So, thoughts on that at all, just and you're seeing more of the hybrid stuff. Like we're starting to get this podium construction where it's, type 1 first floor, restaurant style, we have a restaurant, some shopping mall type area, and then above it, type 5 wood frame, multifamily residential. And just thoughts on that, Jesse, I'll start with you this time, but I mean, am I completely crazy in that thought, or is that?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. And I think sometimes when we get into building construction, we go off on tangents about, who came from the trades and who didn't, but whether you came from the trades or you didn't come from the trades, the whole point we're trying to identify is do you know what to expect and when to expect something bad to happen once that building has been subjected to a fire? So I always think of the building types, type 1 through type 5, and I ask people to think of that as a scale of combustibility. That's the first part, right? So if a type 1 is going to be on a scale of 1 to 5, less combustible than a type 5. So the combustibility part is part of it, but then we get into the structural integrity piece of it. And a 1 versus a 2, yeah, they both lack like combustible building components, so to speak, but one has significantly more mass than the other one does. In type 4 to type 5, both could be a wood frame structure or rely on a lot of combustible materials, but one has significantly more mass than the other one. And then type 3 is that mixed use, the mixture of the masonry and wood. So what does that all mean to us? And what we know is, mass versus math, significantly less surface to mass ratios, whether it's our type 2 kind of standard commercial construction that you'd see at a grocery store or somewhere else, or our type 5 wood frame construction, that lack of surface to mass ratio affects us from a structural collapse standpoint. So those are big things when we talk about building construction and identification of it on a commercial fire.
I like that that analogy of the 1 to 5 combustibility range. What do you think, Anthony? You hit on some construction, some bowstring stuff, and I hear bowstring for whatever reason. I automatically always think like Hackensack, New Jersey, in your town, next to you, or your area, I should say. While I got Anthony here, I want to personally thank him for his hospitality in New Jersey and getting some Taylor ham and egg cheese sandwiches each morning, which was very nice of him. Showed some true New Jersey hospitality. Yeah, but construction wise, what's your take on construction in these commercial buildings?
Okay, and it's Taylor ham, not pork roll.
There you go.
Hey, here's a quick question though: an ice warehouse fire? How does an ice warehouse burn down?
Dude, it's
on water supply.
You would think, you would certainly think, right? But it's
God.
it's like Worcester cold storage, right? I mean, it's just you would think something cold storage.
Yeah, no, I get it, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. We have all the types of construction by us. We have the big old heavy timber. One of them we had in Union City, big heavy timber building, had a job in there, and it was a concrete roof. We couldn't vent the roof, so we had to just only vent the windows. And that was in the beginning of regionalization, so I didn't even know that. So you do need to know your buildings. I mean, we have a ton of bowstring truss. We have the lightweight ones. The tilt slab or tilt up that it's called. The non-combustible, and you put box stuff in here too. The non-combustible warehouse and things. It's listen. If the sprinklers do their job, we should. Things sometimes turn out okay. But then there are other factors that go in there that affect the construction. Like high piled stock and sprinklers being blocked and water supply not being adequate for the area. Like these are all other things that you deal with. But I mean, we've had. I've seen a significant number of fires in bowstring trusses. None of them ever worked out well. And the other end of it is we just have to understand, look, number one, life hazard, water. Get the life hazard out of there as quickly as you can. Hopefully there's not a large life hazard in that building. Know where they are before you go in there. Get water on the fire, get water on the lightweight construction. If it's lightweight steel, try to do it from a distance. But, the other end of the story is we cannot get emotionally involved in the building. If there is no life hazard in these buildings other than ourselves, right? After we've cleared the life hazard, if these buildings are beginning to lose the battle against gravity and against, there's just too much fire, we have to be smart enough to get out of there. We don't save a lot of these buildings, but hopefully we don't kill a lot of people while not saving a lot of these buildings. One of the stats years ago, and I know it's not the same stat now, the most firefighters killed per 1,000 fires were in commercial structures. I think it was 14 was the number. Before that, it was vacants, which was kind of crazy. And you look at it, like residentials they're way low on the list. And again, you look at, we don't go to, more commercial fires than we do residential fires, but, or we don't go to more vacant fires unless you're in Camden or Detroit. So we have to understand the limitations of the building, whether it's vacant or a limitation into construction. And the only two things you really need to know are fire dynamics and building construction. You put those two together, you can make some good decisions.
I love the point of, the life hazard and getting emotionally attached. We had a fire 2 years ago, whatever it was, a large commercial structure fire with the 4 alarms. And, you could see the emotions of the firefighters on the scene, like, hey, we're so close, we could get this, and we're committing resources and trying to do things. And, it was that pride thing, that we all as firefighters, we own. And it's hard to say, hey, listen, this is a loser, right? We had a neighboring department I used to work at, that made a great stop on a Taco Bell, and made an interior attack. And I wasn't there, so I'm not saying anything negative. They did a great job. News reports show the building fire, was inside the building. They went in, did their thing, and what happened 3 days later? That thing was a scrape to the ground. And no one got hurt, right? So no criticism to those guys. They did a great job. But to your point, Anthony, sometimes we can become emotionally attached to something that the owners aren't even attached to. So, Damon, your thoughts on that? And then when you talk about that, Damon, talk about sprinklers too. Talk about construction, but hit on the water supply and sprinkler systems and how that changes the game for us.
Correct. And Anthony just hits reminding me of a particular case study, and I'm not going to name the city, but large Southwest city. We talk about emotional attachment. We talk about culture. We talk about being aggressive, and we all have different connotations of what aggressive means. But it was a McDonald's, and I believe it was at least 2 firefighters who died when the HVAC system fell through. Now, whether we were emotionally attached to that building or not, McDonald's is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. McDonald's, no matter what city they're located in, when they want to build a new or remodel a McDonald's, they're not going to have issues with the building department in terms of getting permits. So we lost a couple firefighters in a McDonald's. The McDonald's was probably rebuilt within less than 6 months, bigger and better, and able to serve Big Macs without any serious interruption. So that emotional attachment, and that's a whole nother conversation. We have to have that conversation, but more importantly, we have to act and behave as company officers, instructors, and chief officers in a manner where we are truly protecting our personnel. Now, we talk about triangles. In the fire service, we have several triangles. We have the fuel triangle. For those of us out here in the West Coast, we have the wildland or vegetation fire triangle that more or less relates how fires behave in a wildland setting. But to this conversation right here, I frame it as one side of that triangle, building construction, the other side of that triangle, the fuel load, and then the third side being fire dynamics, how fires start, sustain, behave, and spread. And we have to frame it in that perspective when we're talking about training and education, more importantly, when we talk about how we act and behave and perform when we're out there on the fire ground. All of us are good at being able to define, okay, these are the features of a type 1 versus a type 2 versus a 3, 4, and 5. But unless we are out there canvassing our first in and second in due districts, not just the first, we really don't know what we have. And all of us live and work in cities where a building was initially built or framed as a type 3. Now it looks like a type 1 or vice versa. So I say that to say, let's not get caught up so much in the types alone, but also what's inside those buildings, that fuel load, and then how those buildings are going to act and behave when they're under fire conditions. We talk about water supply, and I opened up and talk about the importance of quick water, correct application, and in sufficient quantities, but setting ourselves up for success. Sprinklers. Now, as we move towards this push to have more and more buildings, not only commercial, but residential buildings, to have some type of sprinkler system in place, which is a good thing, because anytime we can engineer a building to protect folks, whether they're residents or occupants in the building structure, it's all the best. But one of the things we have to ask ourselves when we're out there training and education for commercial buildings, do we truly understand the fire protection systems? Do we understand how a building that has a PRD in place, a pressure regulating device in place, what that means to us and what that means to that first in engineer who's pumping at that fire, whether the fire is on the first floor or the fire is on the 32nd floor of that building. And that's when we talk about that system demand pressure or system design pressure as one factor. Then also when we talk about water supply, that first in engine, are we giving those crews that are inside that commercial building the best opportunity for success to put that fire out by having sufficient amount of water? We had a fire about a week ago at a medium-sized commercial structure, and typically, like in most agencies, organizations across the United States, we pull that supply line, our case we use for in supply line. But I tell folks, think about welling that hydrant. When we talk about welling that hydrant, making connections, whether it's 2 discharge outlets or 3 discharge outlets off of that hydrant, to make sure you are maximizing the amount of water that's coming into that pumping engine. Then the last part, we're talking about fire protection systems. Is it common practice for us to tie into the FDC and make sure we are supplying that sprinkler system during the early stages of the fire? And I know in some organizations, they have a philosophy that when they arrive on scene, if the fire has advanced, to turn the sprinkler systems off and begin to that phenomenon where we talk about cold smoke and how that can inhibit our ability to get to the seat of the fire. That's something we have to take into consideration. But setting ourselves up for success, maximizing water supply going into that pumping engine or pumping engines, but also making sure that we are correctly feeding that fire protection system, whether it's the sprinkler side of it and or the standpipe side of it.
No, I 100% agree with everything you're saying. And I think, when you talked about the sprinkler systems and, we could talk about, the National Fire Sprinkler System. Shane Ray would tell you, those sprinkler systems are designed for those buildings to provide containment, right? And so they're designed and built for those buildings. And if we come in immediately and start turning them off or negate their presence and, don't support them, the analogy I heard, which I thought was great, was, the sprinkler system is the first arriving engine, and it's our job to support that first arriving engine. And if you think about it like that, I think that helps on the commercial building standpoint, right? So like, hey, there's already a crew inside, granted it's unmanned, and they're flowing water. And if we can support their operation, we can bring some hand lines in and knock that fire out. So, I think that's good. Anthony, what's your take on sprinkler systems? I know you probably have some good experience with them and support their operations. And then in addition to that, you talk about the idea of, I like the emotional attachment idea, but from an IC standpoint, the overcommitment of resources and or your arrival on scene, when you were a tour commander on the job and you show up and like, hey, there's, resources inside that structure already. You're seeing stuff, maybe some of those things that you're looking for that said, hey, listen, this is going south too quick. Come on out. I think you're muted.
Okay. What was the first part of the question?
Oh, no. So sorry. I hit you with a lot of stuff.
Sprinklers.
No. So just the sprinkler systems, right? Like your experience with sprinkler systems and
Okay.
Then, transition into like the idea of, you're a regional tour commander. You went through, a lot of fires in commercial buildings. Some of those things you looked for as arriving on scene, like maybe the crews, maybe, I don't want to knock anybody, maybe overcommitted, right? We've all seen that.
Right.
What were those things you were looking for in the building that said, hey, listen, guys, time out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go around to everybody on those because I think those are critical to get from everybody's perspective.
Well, first of all, with the sprinklers, for us, we respond, 4 engines, 2 ladders, the whole cavalry comes in. Our third arriving engine is the one that hits the pipe on any building, whether it's a high rise or a big box, whatever it happens to be. Our third arriving engine, which then allows our first 2 engines We made up our first 2 engines. So we have 3 guys on a rig, so that's 6 guys, 2 on the water supply, and 4 stretching the line. Like that, we would also bring in probably the 4th arriving engine to man the first line, because you're obviously talking stretching a 2.5. I've had pretty good experiences when the sprinklers are operating. We had one job, and we can talk about command and control on this job because it was really cool the way we did it. It was a rawhide dog bone factory, and there was a fire in the pallets of dog bones, and the sprinkler was holding it in check. And one of the things that we did with that was we made sure once we recognized the sprinkler was holding it in check, start to minimize the personnel, start to bring the people out of the building. Or actually, it wasn't out of the building. We brought them to another area behind like a fire separation, and we set that up as a staging area. And then we just rotated people in and out. The visibility wasn't so good. I was the interior divisioner. I wasn't the IC, and I had a thermal imaging camera. You can see the fire on the top of the pallet, but it was about 7 pallets deep. And I couldn't, we didn't know how far back it was. So we minimized everybody, kept the line there, kept the ladder company there. And we had a firefighter who had forklift experience, utilize a forklift. We also kept guides for the forklift. So we minimized everything. And the only way I knew we had the right pallet is when the fire and the camera started to move. And that's how we got it out. And we set up an area where we broke everything up, So the sprinklers held it in check. We didn't shut the sprinklers down just because we had a line in place. We didn't shut them down until much later. I had another incident where I was a ladder captain, and we had a heavy smoke condition on the first floor of an ordinary factory, old building, and heavy timber. And they couldn't find the fire. It was obvious the sprinklers were going off, but they were going off in the basement, in the cellar. So cellar was like arbitrarily piled stock and all kinds of crap in there, and the hose line, 2.5, we said, you know what? Why don't you guys just stay at the opening here? Let us go in with the lifeline. We can hear the sprinkler going. We can tell it's a cold smoke. So we kind of knew that the sprinklers were controlling the fire, right? A lot of smoke upstairs. It was a Sunday, so there was a long cook time because the place was closed up. So what we did is we took a lifeline and we went in and we negotiated our way through, listening for the water. And when we got there, we had them just pass the hose line forward, put the fire out, but the sprinklers held it in check. But here was another thing where you have to be able to recognize where you're at. Once we extinguished the fire and everything started to clear, we realized we were about 10 feet away from a whole wall of bus bars, live bus bars. Ooh. In this old basement. I mean, we could have easily been fried in this place. Wasn't our day to get fried that day, But there are so many. And one of the things I learned there, if you're going into the basement, look on the outside, see where the service comes into the building. And where the service came into the building, the bus bars were directly below that. Big factory. Then you have to also be concerned with additional feeds coming into the factory, maybe another feed. I know that, we're talking more about sprinklers and stuff. But those were 2 situations where things worked out well. We had other situations with vacant buildings and things like that, where vacant commercials that, the sprinklers weren't activated. We had to actually feed them. They were dry. But by the time that we got them fed, it was basically too late. What I would always do is, we would call, make a call, hose lines, lifelines, and everybody knew, don't get off the hose line, don't get off the lifeline. If you're going to tether off the hose line, that's fine. As soon as I got there, I'd send the division commander. I also had another division commander showing up, and I would, speak to them and say, hey, listen, you know what, what's going on in there? It doesn't look so good out here. What are you thinking? I'm thinking withdrawal. And sometimes I might say most definitely. Sometimes they might say maybe not, But we tried to, our SOPs generally get followed pretty well. And I generally kind of know when I pull up. I get there pretty quickly in North Hudson. It's not a big area, and there's a ton of people and a ton of stuff there. But I would generally get there pretty quickly. I'd have a very good idea who was in there. And, I get it. I understand people can get lost in things. You have to control them. Air management is extremely important in these buildings, and so is discipline. If your companies aren't disciplined, then that's going to be a problem. And that's when, the emotionally charged companies, they're in too far. But know what the worst thing is? An emotionally charged incident commander.
Yeah.
The incident commander is the guy most emotionally charged. You got a really big problem, But I would try to communicate best I could with the companies, whether it was, I could see a crack in the wall outside the building, which was the case in one vacant. And I said, you know what, we're done here. It was in the middle of the night, pulling everybody out, or, just something else I saw from the outside they didn't see from the inside, and vice versa. So I think communications plays a big part, but also discipline in regard to your standard operating procedures when you're dealing with this, we had 35 guys on a first alarm, that's still too many to be running around inside that building. You have to make sure they're being controlled. So
no, I think there's some key points, and so, as we all have done these, like, so many things you pick up on and you listen to, and you're just like, oh my gosh, we could expand an hour just on that little part. Right. But, the fuel, right? So like you think about your house, and, when we talk about this mindset change for commercial buildings, and we say, hey, listen, it's not a house. Yeah, your basements, your garages are stacked full of stuff. We all know that. But there's a lot of these commercial buildings stacks, floor to ceiling, full of combustibles on rack storage. And what are those going to do under fire conditions? What hazards do those present? And then the idea of, very disciplined and very, finite orders, right? Having a clear objective when you assign those resources, go in, do this, come out. And then the idea too of division officers, and I don't want to say, command by team, but really getting those officers in place, so that you get some real good intel to make your, incident command decisions. Jesse, any thoughts on any of that stuff, as well as anything we've been talking about, sprinkler system?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I talk back to the idea of an emotional attachment to the building. A lot of, in suburban America, a lot of the commercial buildings we have are, for lack of better terms, almost built to be disposable. And what I mean by that is I tell people all the time, in residential construction, the consumer plays a big part of that. What do today's consumers want? Open floor plans, high ceilings, these sorts of things. The commercial buildings are influenced by the consumer as well. How do we want to purchase our goods? We see all these distribution centers popping up, and large warehouses, because the consumer orders as many things on the internet to show up at their house as they do go to the store to physically get, right? So as a result, these places have to adapt or just convert. We have a restaurant that sold, and it was a newer restaurant, but the new owner didn't want to use that restaurant. They just tore it down and put a new one up. Literally, I say overnight, but it's such a quick decision. And when we talk about sprinklers and some of our core fireground skills, whether it's a residence or a commercial building, some of those principles still apply. Water mapping, where is the water going? So if you think of that as that first engine, okay, we have the sprinkler, that water's coming down, and now we're trying to use all of our senses to identify where the fire is and where the fire is going. Maybe now that lateral spread or that horizontal spread on that shelf or that rack is a bigger concern or a primary concern versus just going up, where that sprinkler is holding it in check. Maybe we have to distribute our water or consider distributing our water on more of a horizontal level going across those racks. And at the end of the day, we talk about commercial fires and why it's such a big deal, high risk, low frequency. 11 years ago, we responded as a tech rescue resource to a line of duty death in a city in Metro Detroit for a firefighter recovery, not a firefighter rescue. And when you hear dispatches like that, obviously that's the worst thing that we can be dispatched to, but it's not a Monday morning quarterback situation. It's a great fire department that was dealt a difficult hand in the fire they responded to. And if you think of the challenges with commercial building fires, it's not just the square footage, it's the cubic footage, higher ceilings, different fuel loads. It can be difficult to find where the fire's at. And Anthony alluded to that. So if we get in those situations, we can't identify where the fire's at. Time's ticking. One of the things I like to talk about is timeline and coordination. So what is our timeline in general? Are we venting before are we doing things in the right order? We need to cool the environment. We need to get water flowing. Then we can support those efforts with ventilation. But red flags in training, if we can't find the fire, that's a big red flag. And the longer we're in there, the longer that timeline plays out, the longer that fire goes unchecked, the more likely we are to have something bad happen.
No, I always hate hearing those line of duty deaths. And, I had a friend of mine that went up from, he was in Foxborough, and he went to cold storage in Worcester for firefighter recovery as a regional response. And, he said that was a real tough dispatch to hear over the radio, assist for, recovery efforts and things. So, Damon, what about you? With commercial building fires, obviously we talked about a bunch of stuff so far, but, you can hit on all that stuff, obviously, but red flags as well, things that you look for, you obviously said a couple weeks ago, you just had a fire, some things that stand out that, guys listening today, things they could, they go on a fire this afternoon, maybe that, hey, whoa, we talked about this today and I need to, tip my hat to that or whatever.
Yeah. So before I answer that, just going back to a couple comments that Anthony made, and he emphasized in several times in regards to discipline and air management. And I talk about that intersection of mindset, discipline, and air management, commercial versus residential. Unfortunate practice, but the harsh reality in most organizations across the United States, when we go to a residential single-family dwelling fire, and one of the members on that 3 or 4-person interior team, whether they're doing search or advancing a hose line, is running low on air, oftentimes will come out of that structure by him or herself, because that exit door is 10, 15, 20 feet away. And that's the harsh reality. We would be fooling ourselves if we said, Damon, no, whenever we go in as a team and we come out as a team. But I know of one organization where that is not a common practice for that entire crew to go out. So I emphasize that because things that we can't control that will prevent us from getting in trouble, and one of them is being air management. You cannot have the same air management philosophy and practice in a commercial structure versus a residential, because in a commercial structure, that exit point or that safe haven, it could be 50, 60, 100 feet away. It could be 2 or 3 floors down. That will get you out into an environment that will allow you to breathe in ambient air. So for our fellow listeners that are listening currently or will be listening to this Hump Day, what are you doing in regards to teaching and training and educating your folks in the realm of air management and discipline, not only for commercial structures or vice versa for residential structures, but for both? Now, getting back to your point of red flags, at a commercial dwelling, now as a chief officer, when I'm listening to a radio for a structure fire, and we just had this a few weeks ago at a Walgreens. So I'm coming from a meeting, that's what most chief officers do. They go to meetings all day and night and special events. But I'm coming from our OPD, the Oakland Police Department headquarters, and a call comes in for a fire at a vacant warehouse, a Walgreens in the Charlie side dumpster area. So what incident comes to mind? Charleston. So I respond, listen to it on TAC 2, our TAC channel. And so for me, red flags is, what is that first thing company officer saying or not saying over the radio? Am I hearing, if it's an engine company, we have a water supply established? If I hear that, that brings my comfort level down just a tad bit, not a whole bunch. First thing company officer says, we have a fire, smoke fire showing from the 2nd floor, and I know the building, and I'm not hearing that company officer call for a second alarm. That's a red flag to me. Or I hear that company officer give me an additional engine company or additional truck company. Folks, we cannot continue to piecemeal multiple alarms. Call for the second, call for the third. I've never heard a firefighter complain about, I got called out on the second alarm incident and they woke me up, or I missed the last half of the 49ers football game. I've never heard that, and probably never will. So we have to stop doing that. So that's a red flag. Another red flag if I haven't heard that primary search has been completed, it's a red flag. Or if I hear back to back, both primary and secondary search completed, that's a red flag. Who's doing the primary? Who's doing the secondary? How thorough was that primary? How thorough was that secondary? And then a last red flag to me from an incident commander's perspective, especially if I have a second alarm on scene, if I'm not hearing good use of ICS principles. Yes, we know ICS does not put out fires. It's not designed to, but it manages the resources, including people who are at an incident. If I'm not hearing good ICS use that's matching up with the incident as a chief officer, that's another major red flag for me.
All right, that's we're gonna end the show on that because it was just like prolific. No, is all of these are great points. I mean, just you could take and just all those things. Thinking about the red flags of the piecemealing of the second alarm. Give me 2 engines, give me another truck, okay, go ahead and fill out the second. Primary, secondary. That applies to just a residential structure. How many times have we heard that? Hey, do we have primary, secondary done? Well, how'd that happen? I mean, just ICS. We're doing some ICS training last month and this month with my department, and I equated ICS to that customer service that just you can't understand real well. And so it's the same thing holds true on an incident command, right? You hear people using the wrong terms. Hey, we're on group 2. Well, no, you're on division 2. Or they don't use the proper terminology. We're not in the right spots, and we know the people in the right areas. So all good stuff. It's been great talking about commercial building fires. I'd like to transition though, since we are the instructor society. We put a lot of stuff out there so far. All of our training towers are pretty much, short of a few maybe that are out there in major cities or something, are set up for a residential structure. Most would agree with that. If you look at most of the structures, go to FDSE, walk the grounds, most of them are set up for a residential structure fire with maybe a high-rise tower or small component for stretch and hose. What are some trainings or some thoughts on things we could do at both maybe the company and battalion level to make sure that we are set up for success, when we do trainings on these commercial buildings? And Jesse, what do you think? I mean, it comes to me as like, simple stuff we could, get out and walk through the buildings. I mean, just start there.
Yeah.
Build upon that.
No doubt. Yeah. Checking our pre-plans, doing the company walkthroughs. I think those are great starting points. I think another piece of this is we put a lot of emphasis on getting people into structures, but we don't always spend a lot of time on teaching people and drilling on how to get out of that structure. So whether it's the exit the structure drill or the abandon the structure drill, that's incredibly important. The two things we don't want to delay are getting our crews into a building, and we don't want to delay getting our people out of a building. So we think about forcible entry, but we're not always in the mindset of forcible egress. So what opportunities exist in a standard training tower to get that coordination down of, okay, we've gone in, we're on the first floor, second floor, third floor, whatever, but now something changed, we need to get out. Can we get out in a nice orderly way that keeps the integrity of that crew? The second thing is utilizing acquired structures. Acquired structures, we've had so many benefits with that. Again, one of the benefits of commercial buildings is they're renovated or they're demolished and new buildings come and fill where they once stood. And we ran a drill, a forcible egress drill, the idea of understanding the circumstances that you're up against. And it's not as simple as just busting a hole through the wall of the cinder block. It's very difficult. So we've ran a drill several times where we simulate like a lean-to collapse with a section of fencing. And then you and your partner have to coordinate, with your tools that you may or may not have brought in, how to get to the other side of that wall. And it's definitely not as easy as you see once you have an SCBA on, you're in limited space. So back to managing our tools, managing our operational time frame, our air supply, getting people out of a building and drilling on that is a good way that we could utilize both our structure as well as any acquired structure that we're fortunate enough to receive.
No, I totally agree. Acquired structures are awesome training opportunities, and just because you may not be able to burn in them in your area or even want to do that type of option, they do provide an opportunity for a lot of different hands-on activities. Anthony, I know you and I have talked about using calls for alarms and and those sort of things, but other ideas for trainings and things like that, and expand on that, obviously. Muted again, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, pal.
It's because I got the traffic right outside my window.
Oh, I got you. It's all
Muted.
good.
No, but great points, everybody. Some great things being said here. Listen, I think you just have to go out and get into these buildings. Of course, the easy answers are pre-planning and building familiarization, all that, and CAD systems. You got to get out and get into these buildings. And I love what Jesse say about forcible egress. And we do really good. Let's stretch lines in. Let's search in. But how about getting out? How about getting out? That was brilliant, man. We know we used to do a lot in the buildings. We would do pack tracker drills in there. We would just go on a Sunday morning and we tell a company, go get lost, and we would do a pack tracker drill and we would, find them. We would just play hide and seek inside these buildings, The other thing that we would do is we would do our RIT drills, and our RIT drills always started, we would level them out. We would start out like with just things like packaging, First of all, let's do a tool familiarization. Then let's do packaging the next day. Then the following day, let's do rope management systems, right? Then we would start to put it together a little bit, and we'd have somebody, and we'd have all the lights on, and we'd do all the talking and everything that needed to be done. And eventually we'd get to a point where somebody'd be lost. The RIT has to go in. The RIT's blindfolded. They're blacked out on their mask, and they actually have to go and find this guy. But we don't send them in there the very first time because it's not going to be successful most of the time. You need to sort of layer it up and make it success oriented for them, so that there are lessons learned every single step of the way. And the other thing was, I used to always volunteer to be the Uki, where I'd be the guy that was lost, and they'd come in with all the equipment, and they'd have to change out my pack and get me all packaged up, and they would beat the living crap out of me. And but you know what? It was my ability to see my guys at their very best, or maybe at their worst, But it also, from standing outside perspective, I don't know what's going on in there inside a drill, so I would always want to be right near the drill. So I would just offer to be the victim, and it allowed me to see everything, and I think that's what incident commanders need to do. Just standing outside doesn't get you the full picture of what's going on the inside, especially if there's a fire, you're not going to know. But I think we need to I like the layering of drills, not reaching for the moon the first time. Building it up. And we do that a couple of times a year. We'll start from scratch again, and build it up. I think that's an important way to deal with these structures. And get up on the roof.
I was just gonna say that. How many times somebody's like, "Hey, is the roof soft and spongy?" I don't know. I've never walked on the roof before until now. Like, well, that's probably not the best time.
Yeah.
I love the part too, as an instructor, training officer, playing that victim part. See how your crews would actually move somebody if they had to. How would they move a firefighter that's down? We all have these training mannequins, and it's easy. We've done live burns, and how's the training mannequin come out? They get heaved out the window, right? Or they get heaved out the door. Well, you're not going to treat a human like that. So, kind of seeing, hey, what's the techniques and those sort of things. Damon, what about you from the training perspective in Oakland? Thoughts and tips.
Yeah, once again, Jesse and Anthony have done a good job of summing it all up. I'm just going to come back and just add a few points. Point number one is the company officers and chief officers, trainers and educators that are out there listening, is that most of the stuff that we've discussed today does not cost a dime.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to a city that has a $177 million deficit this year, another $177 million deficit next year. There's a major recall on the mayor. However, that does not stop the men and women, or should not stop the men and women that's in these fire stations from going out and practicing on their craft from a training perspective and from an educational perspective. Keep that in mind, folks. Kind of tying this all in together, what I will emphasize to company officers and chief officers from a training and education perspective is having a plan for each day that you come to work. Whether it's 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, a shift, you're doing something to set your folks up for success. So breaking it down, part of your plan, training, education, going over building construction, engine company operations, hand line, selection, advancement, pump operations, fire protection systems. From a truck operations perspective, getting on top of the roof, discussing topside or vertical ventilation, what tools to bring to the roof, reading roofs, live loads versus dead loads, doing walkthroughs, doing an overview of fire protection systems. Harsh reality, most of us, the last time we had a class or discussion on fire protection system was when we were going through our academy. For some, that was 2 years ago. Others, it was 10. People like all of us on the call, that's 20 plus years. Yeah. That cannot continue to be the standard across the United States. And then the last part is building those relationships. Yes, we know in commercial buildings, especially those that are occupied, we can't go in there flowing water, breaching walls, but build those relationships. Come out, hello, ma'am, sir. I'm here from Station 1. This building is in our first due district. Is it okay if we do a walkthrough so that we have a good understanding of the layout and the features in this building? So if we have to come back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll be that much more prepared. And through my years of experience working downtown, I've never had a building engineer or security official say no, with the exception of one. Well, actually two. One, because it was an FBI building, and we all know the FBI is not going to let you go inside. And then the UC Region's office, for some reason, they would not let us walk through past that front door. Otherwise, I've never had issues. So my takeaways.
No, I love that because it's so true. Get in and walk these buildings. And I was talking about, for organizations and fire service, there always opportunities for public relations. And, I say there's no better public relations event than you can do to actually engage your community and actually make the community safer. And walking through these buildings, showing them that you really do care. Hey, what are you here for? No, I'm not here for an inspection. I'm not here to ding you for an extension cord. I'm here that if this building's on fire, I can ensure that we can protect your life and property in an effective manner. And when you say those words and you show them that you really care and you're willing to put your time out there for it, invaluable. Anthony, some final thoughts from you. You're muted again, pal. Internet mute. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I just got like two. Sorry, man. Great points from everybody, man. Great points. Two real short things. The first is, Mom, you talked a little about rack storage. Rack storage, palletized storage, unpalletized, storage. Anytime that you have an area where the storage is piled higher than the aisle is wide, this is something that the officer on this is why first arriving officers have to understand and make the right choices on buildings that change the rules of the game, right? In these type of situations where everything inside the aisle is inside a collapse zone. I mean, it could be, pallets of bricks. It could be toilets at an angle. It could be anything. The first arriving company officer has to make the right choice and use what, call an outside the aisle strategy. You got to flank it. You got a 2.5. You got a big reach of that stream. Knock that fire down. Whatever falls, but at least it ain't falling on your guys, and that's a real important thing for you. First arriving officers, why buildings have changed the rules of the game. When they don't make the right choices, things go south very, very quickly. So your officers got to be right on top of the game. The second thing really important was we learned during some of the sprinkler fires, don't be afraid to leave some of the lights on. We shut the lights down in the area of operation, but areas of egress, just other areas that we're not engaged in right now, especially at a nighttime fire, don't be afraid to keep the lights on. If there's an issue, you shut them down. But we found that it's really much, much safer for companies to work in areas that are not affected by the fire and maybe not so much affected by the smoke. to work where you actually have the lights on and they can see what they're doing and see where they're going. That fire in building where we had the fire in the basement where we had to use the lifeline. I remember that all the lights on the upper floors were on. They didn't shut them off once they recognized the fire was down in the basement. All they did was shut the basement. So, think about that, because all our job is as an incident commander is make sure we get everybody out of the building that we can, make sure we put the fire out, and make sure everybody we have go home. So the more we can do to ensure that, the better off we might be. But thank you for this opportunity here today. You're right. We could talk about this for days.
Oh, I was just thinking, I was like, well, we're going to have to make a continuation of this discussion for the next 3 of these that we do, because I think we could just continue to talk and talk and talk. We're at an hour. We'll wrap this thing up again. Just want to thank everybody. Thank Damon and Jesse and Anthony. Thanks for joining us today. Like I said earlier, thanks to Fire Engineering for hosting the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. If you are not yet a member, which I can't imagine why, if you're in the fire service, you're not a member of our organization yet. Super easy to join. Go to isfsi.org. You can find all the information on there. Tons of great training programs, tons of great training opportunities, mentorships, networking, and conferences. And so great organization if you're a company officer, training officer, chief, or firefighter looking for advancement in your training world. ISFSI is where it's at. So please come and join our membership. Again, October 7th will be the opening for Fire Engineering's FDIC conference. So as we know, classes fill up fast. Hopefully, we will see everyone there this next April in Indianapolis again. And we'll have a great conference again with our general meeting on that Friday. That'll be exciting. So without anything else, guys, I really appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully it was a good hump day for the audience and everybody listening, and take care. We'll see you guys next time. Be safe.
Thank you, President.